Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're looking into Brendan Carr,
Yeah.
and you've provided us with a ton of material here.
Yeah, a lot to unpack.
Articles, research, even your own notes. It seems like you want to get not just who Carr is,
Right.
but why he's become such a controversial figure in telecom.
Absolutely. And it's a deep dive worth taking because he's someone who inspires both a lot of support and a lot of opposition. And I think to really understand that, we need to go back to the beginning
Okay.
and see how a law student from Georgetown ends up being one of the most influential voices that is shaping the future of the internet.
Okay, let's unpack that. So our sources say he was born in D.C. in 1979.
Right in the heart of it.
Already kind of steeped in the world of politics.
Right.
Does that play into his career choices? I mean,
It's certainly possible. I think his education is telling government at Georgetown and then specializing in telecommunications law at Catholic. It's like he had a plan,
yeah.
to be right where he is now.
So it's 2005. He's fresh out of law school. Where does he land?
Wiley Rein, LLP.
Okay.
Big firm, but crucially, they are the go-to for all the telecom giants.
Oh, wow.
So he's not just learning the law, he's learning how the industry itself works, its levers, its pressure points.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So he's representing these companies before the FCC, the very organization he later joins?
Yeah.
Was that always the plan? I mean, to move from advocate to regulator?
It's hard to say for sure, but the shift happens in 2012.
Okay.
He becomes a legal advisor to Ajit Pai, who at that time was a commissioner on the FCC himself.
Oh, wow.
This is where I think things get interesting.
This is where things get really interesting because Pai later becomes the FCC chairman under Trump.
Right.
And who does he tap for commissioner?
Exactly.
It's Brendan Carr, but 2012 pre-Trump.
Right.
What was Carr known for back then?
Wireless infrastructure policy.
Okay.
So he was already building a reputation for streamlining regulation, making it easier for broadband companies, telecom companies to operate. And this becomes a core part of his ideology.
So he believes in less government intervention, more power to the private sector. But even before he was commissioner, he's shaping policy.
Right.
This advisory role wasn't just making coffee.
Not at all.
Right.
He was working on specific policy areas, like updating the rules for how wireless companies use spectrum,
Okay.
which is a crucial resource for mobile broadband.
Right.
So these changes have real-world impacts on how fast your phone works, how much you pay for data, all of that.
So by the time he is commissioner, he's not just some lawyer. He's like a seasoned policy wonk.
Yeah, he knows his stuff.
This is important for the listener to understand.
Yeah.
He's not coming in cold. He's been building to this moment for years.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Which brings us up to 2017, the Trump era. And FCC takes a hard turn towards deregulation.
Yeah.
And Carr is right there in the thick of it. What were some of his key initiatives as commissioner?
There's two big ones, I think, that really stand out, and they seem almost contradictory at first. So on one hand, he's a huge proponent of expanding broadband access, especially to rural areas. He sees this as a fundamental economic issue.
Well, we see this in his support for the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, right?
Exactly, pouring billions of dollars into connectivity.
Yeah.
He argues that in today's world, if you don't have good internet, you're locked out of opportunities.
Yeah.
Education, healthcare, remote work, even just participating in modern society.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he's fiercely against net neutrality.
Yeah.
And he helped dismantle those regulations, arguing they were holding back innovation.
Yeah.
How does he square those two positions?
It all goes back to this core belief in the free market.
Okay.
His argument is that heavy regulation stifles investment.
Okay.
He thinks the best way to get broadband to everyone is to let companies compete,
Right.
innovate without being bogged down by rules.
So even though net neutrality is supposed to protect consumers, he's saying it actually hurts them in the long run because it slows down progress.
Yeah, that's his argument. He believes the market will self-correct, that companies won't risk alienating their customers by, unfairly throttling traffic or creating these fast lanes that people were so worried about.
Okay, so on broadband, it's a rising tide, lifts all boats. Deregulation leads to more investment, leads to wider access.
Right.
But what about big tech?
Yeah.
Here, he's pro-regulation.
Yeah.
Right? He wants the FCC to have more power to control companies like Google and Facebook.
Exactly. He sees them as these gatekeepers, potentially stifling free speech by controlling what people see online.
Okay.
And he's particularly fixated on Section 230.
And for our listener who might not be familiar with that, Section 230 basically shields online platforms from liability for what users post.
Right.
So if someone you know defamed you on Twitter, you can't sue Twitter itself.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And Carr's argument is this gives them too much power, that they can censor content without consequence.
Right.
And he points to these allegations of bias against conservative viewpoints as evidence.
And this all ties into Project 2025, this conservative blueprint for the future,
Yeah.
where the FCC takes a much more active role in regulating big tech.
Yes.
And Carr contributed to this. It's a key part of his ideology.
Absolutely. He believes that these companies have grown too big, too powerful, and that the government needs to step in to protect consumers and ensure a level playing field online.
So it's more nuanced than just always against regulation.
Yeah.
It's more like deregulate, where it encourages competition and innovation,
Right.
but regulate where there's potential for abuse of power.
Exactly. I think that's a fair assessment. He's not ideologically opposed to all regulation, but he's very selective about where he thinks it's necessary.
Right, and that selectivity is where his critics come in.
Exactly.
Like as they see a pattern of favoring certain interests.
Yeah.
Let's talk about his relationship with Elon Musk.
Okay.
He's a vocal supporter of Starlink, SpaceX's satellite internet service, and he went so far as to criticize the FCC for denying SpaceX funding.
Right.
And suggested it was politically motivated after Musk bought Twitter.
Yes, and this raised questions about, whether his support for Starlink was purely based on its merits or whether it was, influenced by this personal relationship with Musk.
Right. And this leads us to, I think, his most controversial moment.
Yeah.
The 2024 nomination for FCC Chairman.
Yeah.
Trump caps him for the job, setting off a firestorm of debate.
Huge.
What were the key arguments on each side?
So his supporters saw him as like the perfect person to shake things up at the FCC. To break what they saw as this big tech stranglehold.
Right.
And to unleash the power of the free market.
Okay.
They loved his focus on broadband expansion, his vision for a deregulated internet.
Makes sense. But his opponents were deeply concerned about his impartiality.
Yeah, they pointed to his history of, siding with industry over consumers.
Right.
His attacks on net neutrality, his cozy relationship with Musk.
Right.
They were afraid he would use the FCC to advance a partisan agenda.
And those fears were fueled by some of his own statements. Yeah. Right. He made comments about CBS not releasing a full interview transcript.
Right.
And even floated the idea of an SNL equal time rule violation. Suggesting he might be willing to use the FCC to pressure media outlets.
Yeah, that's when people started to work.
This is where it gets really interesting for the listener.
Yeah.
Because it's not just these abstract policy debates anymore.
Right.
This is about how they access and use the internet every single day.
Exactly. Carr's decisions, if he became chairman, could have a very real impact on what websites they can access.
Right.
How much they pay for internet, even what kind of information they see online.
So we've laid out who Brendan Carr is, where he's coming from, some of the big fights he's been involved in.
Right.
But now we're in hypothetical territory. What happens if he actually becomes the FCC chairman?
Yeah.
What does that future look like for the average internet user?
It's tough to say for sure, but I think we can look at his past actions, his goals, and make some educated guesses. So let's start with broadband. He's made it clear that expanding access is like his top priority.
Right, and he thinks deregulation is the key to that.
Yeah.
Less red tape, more freedom for companies to invest and innovate, leading to a faster rollout of services, especially in those rural areas he's so focused on.
Exactly. He really believes in that power of the market to solve these problems.
Okay, so we could see things like streamlined processes for building new cell towers, more spectrum auctions to give those wireless companies more bandwidth.
Yeah.
And continued support for programs like the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund.
Exactly.
But his critics say that this market knows best approach could backfire. They worry that without strong regulations, companies will prioritize profits over people.
Yeah.
And so we end up in a scenario where broadband is technically available, but only at these crazy prices that a lot of people just can't afford.
That's the fear. And it's not just about affordability either.
Right.
It's this potential for a two-tiered internet where those who can pay top dollar get these blazing fast speeds and amazing service.
Right.
And everyone else is stuck in the slow lane.
Yeah. And that brings us right back to net neutrality.
Yeah.
Without those rules in place, those internet providers could block or slow down certain types of traffic.
Right.
They could give preferential treatment to their own services.
Yeah.
They could even charge websites a fee to reach their users at faster speeds.
And Carr's argument is that that just won't happen.
Yeah.
That the market will regulate itself, that companies won't want to anger customers by doing that.
Right. But his critics point out that we had those net neutrality rules,
Yeah.
and they were repealed under his watch.
Right.
And they see that as evidence that he's more interested in protecting those internet providers than the consumers.
It's a fundamental difference, I think, in philosophy.
Right.
Carr believes that innovation happens best when the government stays out of it.
Okay.
And his opponents say, no, no, no. In this case, regulation is necessary to keep that internet open and equal.
Right. Okay. So what about his crusade against big tech?
Yeah.
If he's in charge, what could that mean for companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon?
Well, he's said it very clearly that he thinks those companies have too much power.
Okay.
And that they need to be held accountable.
Right.
So we could see the FCC taking a much more active role,
Right.
investigating those allegations of censorship bias, anti-competitive practices.
He specifically targeted Section 230.
Yeah.
That law that shields those online platforms from being liable for the content their users post.
Right. He says it gives them too much power to censor.
Okay.
And that it needs to be reformed.
So he wants platforms to basically be more responsible for what's posted on their sites.
Right. More aggressive moderation,
Okay.
more transparency about their algorithms, potentially even legal liability for harmful content.
But this is tricky, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because his critics worry that this could backfire.
Yeah.
Lead to more censorship, not less.
Right, because if those platforms are afraid of being sued, they might just take everything down.
Exactly. Even stuff that should be protected.
And then there's that question of who gets to decide what is harmful.
Right.
Yeah. There's a real risk that this could be used to silence people, especially if the FCC is seen as biased.
And that brings us to maybe the biggest concern about Carr, this fear that he's going to politicize the FCC, use it to push a certain agenda instead of being impartial.
Yeah. And his comments about potentially using the FCC to pressure those media outlets,
Right.
that did not help.
You really didn't. I mean, it raises those questions about his commitment to freedom of the press.
Yeah.
And how he sees the role of the FCC.
Exactly, in a democracy.
Right. If he's willing to use that power to punish outlets that he doesn't agree with,
Yeah.
that's a dangerous precedent.
It is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Brendan Carr,
Yeah.
we're left with more questions than answers.
It seems like it.
Will he become chairman?
Yeah.
If he does, will he bring in this new era of innovation and connectivity? Or will it backfire and we end up with an internet that's less free, less fair?
It really is a future worth watching.
It is. And hopefully this deep dive gave you some context,
Yeah.
some insight into what's at stake here.
Yeah.
So you can form your own informed opinion.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, this was a good one.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.